My name's Jeremy. It's great to spend a little time with some fellow Canadians. I'm contacting you from Johnson Space Center here in Houston, which is where I live and work. My family's here. I know at least one of my good friends is in the audience. I spoke to him the other day. Casey McLeod, went to RMC with him, lots of shenanigans with him in the past, and I'm sure I know a few of the other folks in the room as well. So anyway, great to spend some time with you. I heard we're running a little bit short on time. I know we're starting late, so why don't we just dive in? I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. I've got a few slides, just some images I wanted to share with you. So let me get that running. So you should see an image on the screen now, hopefully. Somebody just speak up if you don't. While I haven't been to space yet, I'm down here training, getting ready to go, and I guess I'm ready to go. But while you're waiting for a flight assignment, you just work as part of the big team of people here that enables human spaceflight every day. And so I do things like was mentioned in the intro, things like Capcom, training to do spacewalks, for example. I was working on a spacewalk this week in that MBL. And then I was also mentioned, I'm training the new class. Of course, Canada, almost 2 years ago, we hired 2 new astronauts, Josh and Jenny, and I've been working with them and their 11 classmates, getting them through their first 2 years of basic astronaut training. So that's what the Canadian Astronaut Corps is doing here in Houston right now. But the coolest thing we have going on, of course, is David is in space right now while we're chatting. He's up there working away. And he sent me this picture just this week. You can see out one of the windows there is a vehicle that he had just captured, the SpaceX Dragon vehicle, which is a cargo vehicle. There's nobody in it. It's got all our supplies and experiments and water and food, things like that for the crew. So kind of a proud moment for us to have David use Canadarm, reach out and grab that vehicle. Of course, his method to get to the International Space Station was a Russian Soyuz rocket. And he launched in December, and then David will be coming back after 6 months, essentially in June, near the end of June. So pretty awesome. I'm really proud to have a Canadian in space. It's just neat I have a lot of friends in space all the time as I work so closely with the International Corps, but it's special to have a Canadian in space. Of course, this is where David is right now, the International Space Station. And this is actually one of the topics I wanted to discuss with you. I think it's really relevant when you talk about complex project management and some of the real challenges behind that. Not the actual engineering challenges, but the real human challenges behind accomplishing something like what you're looking at on that screen right now, the International Space Station. Huge, the size of a football field, orbits our planet once every 90 minutes. And we built it as an international partnership, which is incredible. Of course, its purpose is to learn. It's our laboratory in space. It's this incredible place where we can learn things. We can see things differently. And what it actually does for scientists and researchers is if you're trying to solve a problem here on the planet and you can remove or change a variable in space, like remove gravity for existence, or change the radiation environment, or change the stressors on the human body, you can see things differently. And it just gives us a unique perspective on science. So here's David and one of his crewmates, Serena, one of our classmates, actually. David and I were hired together almost 10 years ago this month, actually. So doing a human health experiment in space in this image. Of course, it's a complex place to work. Space is an unforgiving environment, so we have to do things like spacewalks, go out and do repairs in the space station. And this was another highlight of David's mission. I know, it was a very personal thing for him, a goal that he was hoping he'd have the opportunity to get outside the space station in that EMU, that spacesuit, and tackle this huge task of doing a spacewalk. And I'll just tell you, spacewalking is the hardest thing that astronauts have to learn to do. And it's definitely the most risk that we actively manage as an astronaut executing a spacewalk. So he did a great job out there with Anne McLean. So we're real proud to see him do that. Of course, we have another method for doing repairs on the space station, and that is Canadarm. So if you pull out your $5 bill, of course, we're all familiar with Canadarm and its legacy. You might be less familiar with the left side of the image, which is Dexter. Dexter is a 2-armed robot that goes on the end of Canadarm, or can just sit on space station and work in one place. And Dexter allows us to do complex tasks that a human would do. So you need two hands to, if you want to change out a computer box outside space station, you grab it with one hand, and then you drive your drill with the other hand to remove the bolts, remove the box, go get a new one, put the new box in, and drive the bolts. And Dexter can do tasks like that. And it has changed our ability to maintain space station without having to send astronauts out on risky spacewalks, which ultimately gives us more time to do more science. And so a really amazing legacy there. And then here's an even better shot of the Dragon capsule that David captured earlier this week. So I just kind of wanted to give you an update about what's going on in space for Canada right now, since we're all proud Canadians and proud of what David and the whole Canadian team are doing in space today. But from your perspective, when I was talking to Casey about what you've been learning, trying to understand what might be valuable for you, I think looking at the complexity of building something as incredible as the International Space Station as an international partnership, I think that's worth digging into just a little bit. And I think I'll start with the impetus of the space station. It's interesting to know that in the beginning, there wasn't an impetus for an international space station. There were actually, the Russians needed to replace their Mir space station, and the Americans hadn't had a space station since Skylab. And they were interested in building their own space station, and it was called Space Station Freedom. And both of those programs were running into issues with respect to political and monetary support. And at one point, there was the decision, I don't know where that decision came from, but a decision to create this international space station out of these two dying programs. Pieces were already actually built on the ground. And the complexity of that engineering task to take two space stations that were never designed to work together and to connect them in space and have them become one station, and then bring in other external partners, other countries. So of course it was Russia and the US, but then you brought in Japan, European Space Agency, and Canada to create the International Space Station. And just to kind of go on that point a little bit more, the first time the initial pieces met, or any of the pieces actually met, the big pieces, was in space. So all engineering was on the ground. Things were built at different places around the world, and they met for the first time in space and had to work. And that's a pretty unique engineering challenge with a lot on the line. So when I thought about, what makes a program like that either work or not work, three things came to mind. And I think they apply to your course. And I'm sure you have other ways to look at this, but this is just my perspective on it. And it really comes down to setting goals, for one. Number two is trust. And three is communication. And communication is easy to say. We all know it's really important. Anytime you have an endeavor you want to undertake as a team, communication is usually the fail point if it doesn't go well. But I mean communication all the way through to the point of actually understanding the needs, desires, and constraints of others, and then working together collaboratively to create a solution. That full communication cycle is really, really important. So in this case of the International Space Station, the goal was pretty clear for everybody. We need a laboratory in space. We need a destination in space where we can go and do continuous experiments, not just up on a space shuttle for 2 weeks and come back down, but a place where we can really dig into the science and grow our space capability as humanity. So that goal was clear. Trust, not so clear. You're talking about working with international partners where trust isn't the first thing that comes to mind, especially when you think about current diplomatic relations even today or back then between these nations, Russia, US, Canada, Japan, and the European Space Agency, or European countries. Trust wasn't the number one word between all of those relationships. And I believe how this was overcome was grassroots efforts of individual relationships. And this photo that I chose to kind of ponder on here, pause on, represents astronauts from all the countries involved in the partnership. It was a time when the space shuttle was actually docked to space station, and you had a full increment crew there. And down at the bottom, you may have recognized already, but is Julie Piet. our Governor General, and Dr. Bob Thirsk, another Canadian astronaut who was on board that station for a 6-month increment when that photo was taken. I think the trust was built, of course, between the astronauts, but also between the people on the ground operating, running these programs, creating these solutions. It was built by actually going and working together in a room, eating together in the evenings, and really building relationships where people could understand how they could each bring pieces to achieve that goal. And then finally, taking that communication cycle all the way through to really understand the different perspectives. And I've learned a lot about that myself, having lived and worked in Russia, for example. There is just a different way to approaching the problem. There are different things that matter. And really understanding the culture and all the complexities of that is what enables something as incredible as the International Space Station to exist. I'll tell you that by bringing the international community into it, you didn't make the problem easier. You made the problem of building a space station harder. I'd say the overall cost probably got more expensive, although the cost to the individual partners got less, was reduced. But what you benefit from is the stability. The fact that you have now an international partnership, that you've developed this trust, that you've signed international governmental agreements, it makes it very difficult for a country to get cold feet and just walk away. And that has been the benefit of the International Space Station, is that once you signed and once we were all in, there was real momentum to follow through and to finish the project and not walk away. And I think if we didn't have that extra complexity of the international partnership, we wouldn't have achieved our goal. The next thing I wanted to talk about was how space is changing. And change obviously creates great challenge. We always talk about change as a huge challenge, but there is great change in space right now, and it is challenging all of our programs to think differently and work differently. I'll give you one very visual example of the change, is that we now live in a world where rockets blast off, deliver their payloads, and then turn around and land again and are reused like an airliner is reused. So this is an example of a Falcon Heavy rocket on the launch pad. You can see down to the side, you can see a vehicle there. It gives you some perspective of size. This is not a tiny rocket. This is a big rocket. And of course, after it launches, we see these 2 boosters that are on the side come back and land. And then the 3rd booster was actually recovered out in the ocean on a barge. But this is incredible. And this is just one example of how space is changing. Probably the biggest result of this is that the cost of getting to space is being reduced. And when the cost of going to space is reduced, of course, we're going to do more of it. And so that is driving a lot of change. So some other changes that are coming is we're moving from just purely government delivery of astronauts to space to using commercial partners. So when you saw that Dragon vehicle that David captured with the arm, it was from SpaceX, and they're now building a commercial crew version of this. So commercial companies are already delivering cargo to space, sort of like FedEx, but now commercial companies are going to enable us to deliver humans to space. So SpaceX is one example. This is the Boeing Starliner capsule. Both of these are fully funded by NASA to transport astronauts to the space station in less than a year from now, the current schedule. A 3rd vehicle here, this one's not commercial. This is a NASA program, the Orion capsule, made to take us into deep space. This is a commercial vehicle being developed to deliver cargo in the next contract, the next round being offered. This is Dream Chaser. This is Blue Origin is now in the space. This is Jeff Bezos from Amazon. This company is doing a lot of incredible work. They already have a reusable suborbital rocket, and they're working on a reusable orbital rocket. And so this is all just to show you that space is really changing right now, and it's challenging us. And you may have heard that Canada this year decided to commit to something called Gateway, because our international partnership is talking about going to the moon, and NASA is leading the charge of taking us back to the moon. And one of the key enablers is this Gateway program. And I think it's kind of interesting from the perspective of your course to think about why this Gateway exists and how it came to fruition. It has an interesting story, sort of like the International Space Station did. But the goal of NASA, if you go back years, was to push humanity beyond low Earth orbit again, out into the deeper solar system. When I was hired as an astronaut, we were going direct to the surface of the moon. And then there was a change in the leadership in the US, and they changed from going to the surface of the moon to going to an asteroid, and then on to Mars after that. And now we have a new shift to go back to the moon again. And what I have seen NASA realize is that with the shifting goals, when leadership changes the goal within a 4 or even an 8-year period, you may be unable to deliver a program. You may be shutting down a program that you just invested billions of dollars in over a number of years. And what I saw years ago after the Constellation program was canceled, which was the one to go to the moon, was a recognition that this threat of changing the goal was killing the ability of the program to move forward. And so a new goal was created to create this gateway, because the gateway is just that. It's an enabler to do any mission you want to do. It helps you construct all the key pieces that you need and gives you a place to park them, reuse them, repair them, refuel them, and do science. It brought a number of goals together. It said, if you want to go to the moon, Gateway is your project. If you want to go to an asteroid, Gateway is your project. If you want to do science outside the effects of the Earth's magnetic field, or you want to look, you want to get out of some of the environment, the cluttered noise environment from all the signals of Earth, Gateway is your project. And so it aligned goals of many communities and different countries around the world. And it leveraged a trust relationship that already existed. It brought in the existing International Space Station partners and said, hey, we already have a bond of trust. Why don't we get together and we'll lead the space programs of the world, and we'll invite others to join this program in whatever capacity or size that they can. As long as they can deliver value and bring value, they can join us. And so the three things I was talking about before, goals, trust, and then communication, which is of course what the exercise we're going through now to actually deliver on this, they were all brought into the scope to get us to Gateway. And now NASA has really shifted their goal to getting to the surface of the moon in a much shorter time frame. But Gateway is still going to be part of that architecture because it's the strategy to maintain a consistent and common goal amongst the international partnership. I think that really ties into what you guys are talking about. I'm just watching the clock here. I think I was going to talk about some other things, but I think I'm going to wrap up here shortly. The other thing I wanted you to know as Canadians is why our contribution to Gateway matters to Canada. It's not the specific goal of creating the Gateway that is so important to Canada. It is the strategy of evolving our robotic technology. So I think arguably you probably understand that Canada is a world leader in space robotics. And I'll just tell you that space robotics are not the same as terrestrial robotics. They are just completely different beasts. Canada is a world leading expert in space robotics, not necessarily a world leader in just terrestrial robotics. But we do have an edge when it comes to space robotics. And space robotics, from a commercial standpoint, is coming into its own. It's coming into its age right now. If you imagine that we use space every day, you and I, which we do, of course, and we use more and more of it every year, the way we deliver those services from space, all those satellites, that infrastructure in low Earth orbit or in other Earth orbits, is going to change. We're going to learn how to do it cheaper and more effectively. And one of the key enablers to that is going to be space robotics. The writing is clearly on the wall if you understand anything about space. And so Canada maintaining its edge in space robotics is a very key and critical strategy for Canada to maintain a small niche of the space market that we already have and that is going to grow tremendously in the future. So I think it's very important as leaders of Canada, which all of you are, just wanted you to understand why our Gateway commitment and our robotic commitment is a very strong strategic play for Canada. And one last thing is, I talked about the commercialization of things like cargo and flying people to space. But we're also seeing with Gateway a change in how we, and this really comes down to, this affects our government, the government aspects of the space program. We're seeing a shift in how the United States right now is changing their procurement strategies in order to be able to put industrial development ahead of just standard government procurement practices. And that's because if you don't enable an industrial industry to do these things for you, in the long run, you will drive your costs much, much higher. And in a rapidly evolving sector like space is right now, this is an important strategy. So changing how we procure things and doing things like I was talking about, setting clear goals of what we want, and then having a trust relationship between government and the industrial partners that are involved is going to be much, much more important, because that's kind of what procurement strategies protect for, is for failures and trust. And we need to be a little bit smarter about how we develop those trust relationships and then close it out with that communication cycle that I was talking about. Really understanding what's important from a Canadian point of view, from a societal point of view, and making sure that the government and the industrial partner can create a solution that's going to bring those benefits that we expect. Okay, I'll just add the last little bit I was going to cover. I'm not going to pull the slides up, but just to give you some perspective on Canada's space program. The announcement for the gateway contribution, the robotic contribution, was a time-critical one, but not really necessarily the biggest and most important part of our strategy moving forward for Canada. And when you talk about decision-making for the country, what I experienced in watching over the last year and a half was really our enemy was communication. And it was all the things I was talking about, the goals, the trust, and the communication. I guess, we had gotten to the point with space where I felt like the communication and the understanding of what it really took to deliver a visionary space program had been lost. And what we were lacking was an understanding of what the goal was at the highest levels of Canadian leadership. Within industry, within government, all of that, we didn't have a clear understanding of what our goals were. And that is what we need. That's why I saw industry asking for and craving a strategy from the government, at least an initial strategy to get us all pointed and rowing in the same direction. And so there is definitely some existing trust, but not a strong impetus to develop even more trust between all the different players involved. And there's a lot of players involved in space today. Space has changed so much. The way we got here with Canada's space program having so much ability to affect and deliver value around the world was because our perspective on space before had kind of been like, this is this emerging sector. We just need to go out and try things, and we'll spend money almost in the name of pure science, really. Is how we got to where we are today. But now space has changed. Now space is such an important part of every government sector, pretty much. For delivering some service, everybody's using space, and even industry is using space. So space changed, but we didn't change our why for doing space. We didn't have a clear understanding. And so it started kind of at the bottom, where it was like we needed to start communicating about how space has changed and why we need to change what we're doing in space. One of the things that I found was probably the most compelling argument for decision makers was the fact that people today seem to understand that we do use space in our everyday lives. It's not hard for them to believe that if we could turn off space for a day, that their lives would be significantly impacted, from everything from, banking to driving to flying to communications. All of it would be at least shut down for a period of time until we learned how to do it without space. And this is one of the things that people often, I think, is one of the hurdles to understanding this, is people remember a time where we didn't rely on space. So they just think, well, we don't need space to do it. And that's a true statement. There was a time where we didn't rely on space. But that time has passed because we decided we could do it cheaper from space. We could deliver services cheaper from space across the entire globe, and certainly across a vast country like Canada. And so people today understand, at least vaguely, why space is important, and they understand that we will do more space tomorrow than we do today. People buy that side of the argument. It's understandable. What I felt was missing in Canada was an understanding that if you did not intentionally develop a sovereign capability to deliver space, to trade in the space sector, that you would change from being an exporter of space, which Canada is today. We export space products and we trade space products. So if we want to do science on board International Space Station, we don't pay someone to deliver the science for us. We build an arm in Canada, and then we have those jobs and that innovation in Canada. And in exchange, we get the Americans to fly our experiment up to space station, and then international astronauts do it on our behalf. So that is how we get things in Canada. We either export or we trade in space. But tomorrow, if we don't have that sovereign capability, we will become an importer of space. And every time you have a government program where you need to deliver a service, instead of that money being delivered and creating Canadian jobs, Canadian innovation, benefits to Canadians, it just won't be there. We will just have to hand cash across the border or find something else valuable that we can trade, and it won't be a space product. And I think that was an important part of the communication cycle for our leadership across the board to understand. And there were a lot of players involved in communicating that message. You know, if you're in Ottawa, I don't know how far you guys all travel to take this course, but for those of you who are in Ottawa, you probably saw a pretty large campaign from Canadian industry called Don't Let Go Canada. And it was all about just communicating and allowing people to understand the reality of what was at stake. And now today we have a strategy that, of course, the Canadarm is an important piece of that strategy, developing the next generation. I probably should add, it's not just like a repeat of Canadarm2. It's not simply building another Canadarm2 and putting it deeper in space. This is a completely unique problem to operate robotics so far from planet Earth. We actually have to increase our automation. We're going to actually embed artificial intelligence into the systematic methodology of being able to deliver those automated robotics out in lunar orbit, where the gateway is going to be. And so it's a really huge challenge for Canada to take on. So that is an important part of the strategy. But the other aspects of the strategy are to ensure we are tackling what I was just talking about, that we keep a broad set of tools in our toolbox to be able to deliver space for Canadians and trade those things or export them in order to get everything we need. Because Canada, quite frankly, we're obviously small from a GDP point of view. We can't do everything you need to do alone if it's a spacefaring nation. Space situational awareness and defense in space and all those things, we won't be able to do it alone. So we need to be able to bring value to our international partners and have those trust relationships if we want to accomplish our goals of the future.